How is it rocking, Dween Nation? Stay here because we are just about to get underway. In the meantime, please like, comment, and subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications. We put out weekly sports content, and we want to continue to build up Dween Nation and the brand that is Dween Sports. Thank you all, and enjoy. Welcome in, Dween Nation. This is your host, Justin Paez, alongside Genoa Agudelo, and we are back for another episode. We just had our rapid fire picks. We had our fantasy forecast, in-depth analysis of every game, every team, every player on the Week 3 slate. And now we're talking about our starts and our sits. Players that you need to have in your lineup and a player that you should put on your bench. But before we dive into those must starts and must sit, Genoa, how you feeling today?
Yo, Dween Nation, Justin, I'm feeling great. It starts and sits day. It's kind of the tradition in the middle of the week. You know what I'm saying? Right before Thursday and right after Tuesday, just right in the middle on a Wednesday. You figure out who you're starting and who you're sitting. You got to identify the matchups. You're looking at practice reports there. And, this is very exciting, Justin, because, these are some players that could, you and I'm looking at our list here. We have a pretty good list here. We pretty much talked about, their teams winning in very dramatic fashion there. And so I really love what we're going to talk about here on our starts or sits. And so I'm ready to get right into it there.
Yeah, let's dive into it. I'll start at the top with my first start of the week, which is Joe Burrow, Cincinnati Bengals quarterback. He hosts the Washington Commanders on Monday Night Football. We kind of saw Cincinnati step up last week on the road in Kansas City. Obviously, there's a clear hatred for Kansas City, that rivalry of sorts. But I think that gave the Bengals enough to propel them to start being useful and impactful on the offensive side. Plus, Jamar Chase has got that squeaky wheel running. He was mad at the refs and mad at his team. And obviously, he wants that contract real bad. And I think this is the perfect matchup against the worst defense to wide receivers. And I think Joe Burrow utilizes that and goes off. And big game for Jamar, big game for Gesicki. And that all equals to Joe Burrow having a top 5 fantasy performance.
Yeah, Justin, I'm right there with you. I love that. I think that Joe Burrow could potentially throw 5 touchdowns. Jamar Chase is going to have a great game. I don't think there's anybody on Washington that can guard him. If T. Higgins comes back, he can add a good amount of yards there to give Joe Burrow, up to 300 yards. Maybe T. Higgins could score. We like Gesicki as a red zone threat. They got some looks to Burton last year, who was one of my deep rookie sleepers. Jermaine Burton, I think he came out of the University of Alabama.
That's right.
And also we mentioned Iosivas, who scored 2 touchdowns last week in Kansas City. He's going to be a guy that Burrow's also going to be looking at here too if T. Higgins isn't able to make it. And so I like Burrow overall. And with Zach Moss being in the backfield, he kind of gives that receiving threat kind of running back out of the backfield. And so I like Burrow a lot there. I'm going to go with my quarterback start of the week, and it's Jared Goff. I said in previous video on our game picks, our fantasy kind of analysis, that Arizona versus the Lions is the game of the week. And it's got firecrackers potential written all over it. Literally, it's boxed up and it says, wait for Sunday. Pretty much that's what it's saying. What I'm saying? Light it up on Sunday. And so I like every player in this game. And I really especially like Sam Laporta to have a great game. 100, like I mentioned, 100 yards, 2 touchdowns. And, that ties into Jared Goff stats. But I also mentioned that Amon-Ra St. Brown's wins, the game off a touchdown. I would say a 30-yard touchdown. Kind of breaks off, 2 to 3 defenders and scores. And, I like Goff to finish off with 4 touchdowns there. I think he might find maybe a Jameson Williams or maybe just a rando for his 4th touchdown there. I like Jared Goff to most definitely go over 300 yards. If not 350, he potentially could land 400 to 425 there. I feel like the Cardinals defense is riding high on their dominant, display last week. And they're not really focused on the Lions, who lost last week, who were pissed off, lost, only scored 16 points at home. And Jared Goff is ready to go there. It's their first road game of the season. Dan Campbell's going to be pumped up, ready to go make sure his offense. And I, Jared Goff, don't really like him on away games, but I like him in this away game because I feel like Kyler Murray's going to be able to match them. In Detroit, they have that pride. It's always like, you're not going to do that to me. Watch what we can do. We're going to hit you right back in the mouth. what Dan Campbell said in his opening press conference. And so I like Jared Goff a lot this week. Fire him up. If you don't have him in any leagues, or if you have, a Josh Allen over him or Patrick Mahomes over him, fire him up in daily fantasy leagues. Fire him up in, FanDuel, any like price picks or underdog parlays there. I like his fantasy score there. I think he can definitely go over.
No, I think Goff's a great pick, and I think you mentioned it perfectly. I think they're going to be angry. They got upset at home. That was not what they wanted, not what they expected. Jared Goff played poorly, and they're going to come into in the thing about Arizona, it's a dome. So we usually don't like Goff in outside away games. He still gets to play inside against Arizona, so I think that's a great pick, and he's got great options there. Moving to my next start of the week, Tony Pollard of the Tennessee Titans. Tyjae Spears is still working off that injury, and Tony Pollard has the best running back matchup you could ask for going against the Green Bay Packers. We saw Jonathan Taylor go 12 for 100 last week, and only on 12 carries. It's right under 10 yards a carry, and didn't even play the fourth quarter. And then we had Saquon Barkley with 3 touchdowns in week 1, and Tony Pollard's looked darn good. And with Will Levis kind of struggling thus far, I think they're going to want to rely on their running back, and that is Tony Pollard. I expect a victory too, so I expect them to be up in this game, and I expect Tony Pollard to be a top 5 running back.
Yeah, Justin, I'm looking at the injury report here. Tyjae Spears is battling an injury. They're not sure if he'll play, so that definitely boosts Tony Pollard's. I have absolutely no shares of Tony Pollard. He's actually been a bit of a surprise this season. He had a great week 1, very surprising week 1. And I feel like they can, obviously last week was whatever. I feel like they can kind of, build upon that going into this week. And they're home, right? They're going against the Packers. And they've gave up a lot of fantasy points to, running backs. And, the Titans are looking for their first victory. So they're going to have to use every playmaker they can. And I like it. I like Tony Pollard to lead, with about 20 to 25 carries. So, yeah. Very good pick there. With my running back, I'm going to go with Brian Robinson Jr. I just love what he was able to do last week, and they didn't even score a touchdown. Even with Eckler there, Brian Robinson Jr. is still going to get his, touches. And I love that. I really love that for him. He had 12 carries in week 1, but he still had a touchdown. And last week 2, he goes over 100 rushing yards with only on 17 carries. He actually gets 133 rushing yards, right? And I like what he can do against Cincinnati. Before Pacheco went out, he had about 90 yards there. And week 1, Ramondre Stevenson absolutely feasted on the Bengals. There. And he literally, the Patriots were like a one-trick pony that game, handling it off to Ramondre Stevenson over and over again. That's what's going to happen this week. I feel like there's going to be a little less of Austin Eckler and a little bit more Brian Robinson Jr. And I feel like this time, not only does he get 100 yards, he could finish with a touchdown as well. So I definitely like Brian Robinson as my start of the week in the running back category.
No, I think it's good. And it's been clear thus far in the season that he is the ever down back. Like, he can play third down. I know they have Eckler, and Eckler will slot into some, he'll get his snaps. But I think Robinson is who they trust the most. And down near the goal line, they don't want Jaden Daniels to be running in all those touchdowns. So I think Brian Robinson will be a good pick there. Moving to my third and final start of the week, I have Jaxon Smith-Njigba of the Seattle Seahawks. We were really waiting for one of those breakout games for him, and I think we finally saw it. 12 catches, 117 yards. Great game for Jaxon Smith-Njigba. Had 16 targets. And I think this game's going to be back and forth. I do expect Skylar Thompson to kind of be able to contend with the Seahawks and go back and forth, throwing it to Tyreek and Achane and Waddle and Jonnu Smith even. So I think it's going to go back and forth. And the Dolphins have been one of the worst teams against the slot wide receiver, and that's where Jaxon Smith-Njigba, works out of. And I think, Ramsey will kind of focus on DK more, and JSN will have the opportunities to have a huge game. And I think he'll outscore DK this week and be one of the top 15 wide receivers.
Yeah, Justin, I mentioned this in our breakout video. I really love Jaxon Smith-Njigba this year. He is moving up to that number wide receiver 2 spot on the Seahawks. And you can make the argument he could be number 1. And I love DK, but he has his issues on the field with a lot of defenders.
Hmm.
He gets very discouraged easily. He gets very angry. And I feel like that I question his character just a little bit. However, I do love Jackson Smith-Njigba this week. This game, even if DK were to have a big game, this game does, like I mentioned, have shootout potential. So Geno Smith's going to rely on his other wide receiver there, JSN. And, in our breakout video, I was like, oh, at some point this year, he's going to get his 100 yards. And now, I feel like at some point this year, he's going to get his touchdown. So I think he had just a couple touchdowns last year. But yeah, now this is going to start of his year where he can get potentially 5 to 7 touchdowns there. And I like that being this week. Geno Smith is a pretty reliable fantasy quarterback. He's going to need to get his touchdowns. I do think Jason snags one of them in this little mini shootout. So you have Jason. So from one former Ohio State wide receiver, I'm going to bring up another one. I want to match you one. And I'm going to go with Chris Olave there. You mentioned in our predictions episode that you're excited for this Philly and Saints game. You were considering it, I think, having it as your game of the week.
Mm-hmm.
And this could be a great shootout there. Derek Carr is playing great right now. And Shaheed has kind of been leading. And I think this week maybe perhaps Shaheed takes a step back because it's so dominantly a Chris Olave game. And Chris Olave to start the year, he's been pretty good. He's been pretty good to start the year. Last week, he did only have 81, yards. And the week before, he was a little quiet there just because it was a massive, Shaheed game. And Derek Carr was kind of throwing it to everybody in sight. Kamara had a pretty good game. But this is Olave's game to break out there. They've had 2 blowouts in the past 2 weeks, so maybe you can make the argument that Olave wasn't looked up much at because of the game script. This week's going to be different. Jalen Hurts is going to have the Eagles in scoring range many times this game. The Saints are going to need to match it, and that starts going through Olave. Kamara had a great game. I feel like he's going to ride just a little low into this week, and it's going to be an Olave game. I'm thinking 126 yards and 2 touchdowns there for Olave.
No, I think Olave is a great pick. We got both Ohio State Buckeyes as our wide receiver starts. And I think you're right. I mean, through 2 weeks, it's kind of been the Shaheed and Kamara show. And I think the Saints are going to want to get Olave involved. I mean, he actually almost had a phenomenal game against Dallas last week. He literally fell on the 1 inch or 2 inch yard line. Like, he was right there. And then obviously, I think Derek Carr might have scored that one, or it would have been a Kamara touchdown.
Yeah.
But anyway, Olave's been close. He just, he's been, as you mentioned, part of blowouts where they didn't have to use him for the back half of the game. And I think this week will be a lot closer, and that's going to only benefit him. So that's a great pick there. Now moving to the sad side of, fantasy football. We got to pick guys that we think are not going to be plays for your fantasy lineup this week. And I have Devin Singletary as my pick this week as my one sit of the week. Last week, he looked really great. 16 carries, 95 yards, and a score. Was a top 15 running back on the week. And he's been utilized as the workhorse. We haven't seen much of Tyrone Tracy or anybody else. I think Eric Gray's behind that. So Devin Singletary is getting all the work, but he goes against Cleveland on the road this week. I think Cleveland's in line to lock him down and lock down this, this Giants team. I think Cleveland's going to be in a position where they're like, hey, we're going to make sure that you can't run with Singletary, and we're going to make Daniel Jones pass because Daniel Jones, not a very good quarterback. So I expect Devin Singletary to struggle, and especially because I think they're going to be trailing in this game, so they're not going to be wanting to utilize the ground as much. And so I have Devin Singletary, a thumbs down, and my sit of the week.
Yeah, I like that a lot, to be honest. Browns defense is very stingy. So I like them a lot to stop Devin Singletary there. For my sit of the week, I'm starting this guy in our main league, Justin, but just beware. And I'm going to go with Jaylen Waddle here. And I feel like, yes, this could be a potential shootout. But I do feel like, Devon Achane's going to get his, maybe most of it if he returns, he'll get a touchdown. Obviously, we love Tyreek Hill to have a massive game there. He's always going to have a Tyreek Hill show out. And maybe Jonnu Smith kind of gets a touchdown there. They've been involving him a lot. They've been giving him targets and catches. Maybe he can break out, which leaves Jaylen Waddle out in the cold. And I don't know if Skylar, Thompson has, great chemistry and rapport yet with Jaylen Waddle. Maybe hopefully along the way of the season, they do. But for right now, Jaylen Waddle, I'm a little worried about going to this week in Seattle. I think there's probably other people that score, and Jaylen Waddle, probably finishes with another one with 3 to 4 fantasy points.
No, I think Waddle, like we talked about it, much of this week through the reactions and, the analysis, the forecast, that we think Skylar Thompson's going to get it to Tyreek Hill. They're going to funnel it to Tyreek Hill because he's the most reliable piece, as well as Devon Achane and a security blanket tight end and Jonnu Smith. But then where does Jaylen Waddle fit into that, equation? And I think it's going to be rough for him this week. But yeah, I think that's a good sit. That I'd be sitting him if I had the option to. I know in leagues that like the one you're mentioning, you had to start him, and sometimes that's the way the ball rolls. Maybe you have Cup or Debo, and you can't plug those guys in this week, so you got to go with Jaylen Waddle. But yeah, so that wraps up our starts and sit of the week. Must starts and must sits. It's essential going into this week, and these are good players that we have to sit. That it's a tough matchup or a tough situation. You can't start them. And then on the flip side, maybe it's some guys that are kind of under the radar. They got a good matchup or a good opportunity, and you got to throw them in your lineup. So thanks, guys, for listening. This is our last episode of the week. So if you're like, whoa, I only got to see this one, just scroll back down. We got 2 fantasy forecast episodes and a rapid game picks episode to watch. So check those out. Of course, like, comment, subscribe, and share. And, this week is going to be fun, but next week's going to be even more crazy because in our big league, I get to face Genoa next week. So we're going head to head, from brothers to enemies. But yeah, so we'll be getting into that more next week. But enjoy week 3, guys. Use this information to your benefit, and let's win our weeks in week 3. Genoa, send us out.
Absolutely, Justin. We all want to get W's this week. We know how the season's going, and hey, this season's been so much fun, Justin. I'm excited to cover it, break it down with you in every single way we can here at Dween Sports, Dween Nation. We love you guys. Thank you for following up on our week 3 content. We're excited. So if you need help, let us know. Give us a message. But Dween Nation, thanks for watching. And as always,
peace.